I've played tons of games, more games than I'm comfortable admitting, and while I've only ever fixed airplanes professionally and played games in my off time, for some weird reason people ask me, "Hey Fortefyre, are you a firefighter in real life?" To which I say, No, I am not. But that made me think, are there any good games based on the theme of firefighting out there? Yeah, there are, and that's the topic of today's episode, one that was suggested by Bananonymous, last name 5693, way back 10 months ago. Now, before we begin this episode, I do want to say there are tons of games out there that cover the theme, and no, I can't play them all because A, I'm not made of money, and B, there's a certain point where emulation just turns into straight up bullshit piracy, right? So I played all of the games based on firefighting that I could rationally play by way of emulation or that I currently own. Now, these aren't the best ever, but from what I've played, these are my personal top 10 games based on firefighting. Let's begin. When I started my journey checking out these games, I knew I was in for a bad time. In fact, I went through tons of horrible firefighting games, novel attempts at bringing the theme to the video game industry. But one that stood out was Flying Hero, released on the Famicom. Now, this game was made by ICOM, a company that is pretty hit or miss, and out of the 20 known games that I could find, 60% of them aren't that good. But there are a few decent ones, if that makes sense. In Flying Hero, our whole objective is just to save people from a fire, while also extinguishing said fire. How do we do that? We play Arkanoid, because that's what it feels like. We launch up our flying hero and we bounce him around. Now, our main objective is to put out fires, which we do by bouncing the flying hero into them, but we can also save people by hitting them and bringing them down on the canopy. The only real way to lose is either to smack face first into the pavement or from the bird. What's wrong with the bird? Well, the bird ate some 5-alarm chili and he's shitting fire, and if his butt flames hit your canopy a few times, it burns it up. No canopy, no flying hero. This is a fun one, and it's worth checking out if you have time and want to broaden your horizons for Japanese Famicom titles.
On course.
In the early 2000s, Atari had the license to make some novelty games for kids using the Tonka license from Hasbro. Now, from the get-go, there is no clear objective. In fact, it's a bunch of mini-games, but these games, they're fun. We have the ladder truck we can customize, we can bring out our ladder truck to put out fires. In some ways it's like Emergency, but we're only the firefighter aspect of it. It's a really fun game, and honestly, if you want to give your kids some pretty awesome educational games that serve a purpose other than cramming knowledge down their throat, all of Tonka's games are brilliant. Tonka Search and Rescue and Tonka Construction are among my favorites. Don't knock them till you try it. Next, we're hopping on to the MSX home computer with a company that pretty much dominated it, Hudson Soft. Now, if you've played a Hudson Soft game, many of their titles were simple in design and aimed to a younger demographic. From the top of my head, they covered nearly every single theme, genre, and topic you could imagine, as long as it was appropriate for kids. Think of Milon's Secret Castle, Bomberman, Starship Hector, the works. They were cutesy games, but let me tell you something. No matter how cute these games were, they oftentimes have an incredibly deceptive difficulty. Fire Rescue has us playing as a firefighter going into a burning building saving mice. We climb ladders, walk up to the mice, slap them on the shoulder and give them some inspiring words where they follow us to a ladder and leave the building. As the levels progress, there will eventually be walking fireballs, which will eventually eat the ground, making it more tough to navigate the platforms. And while it isn't the greatest thing since sliced bread, it's actually quite charming and fun. I was kind of on the fence putting this on the list, but at the end of the day, the game is pretty cool. It was created by Jaleco, who had a strong arcade presence, which spread to damn near every console of the era, and you never really knew what to expect. Sometimes they did well, sometimes they didn't do well. Luckily for me, the good outweighs the bad. We can't expect everyone to be flawless, and I wouldn't trust a flawless company. I prefer developers that trip up once or twice because they learn from their mistakes. Bethesda. Now, the ignition factor is much like a game we'll see later on this list, the Fyrefighters, but the Fyrefighters wasn't released in America for the Super Nintendo. So what we had was the ignition factor, which is a 2D top-down adventure where we control firefighters going into buildings and rescuing civilians. Now, where it gets complicated, which is a trend you'll notice with Jaleco, is that from the get-go we have to choose the right equipment to carry. Not all fires are the same. Some fires can only be put out by traditional extinguishers, while others have to be put out by ones designed for chemical or electrical fires. And the special extinguishers have limited ammunition, if you want to call it that, limit supply. We can only carry 5 items before we weigh ourselves down and our mobility is affected. And we do need to kick down doors sometimes, so we can't be too over encumbered. It is a badass game, but it does feel like trial and error, and I'm sure when I do play it fully all the way to the end, I might have a good time, but from the initial impressions, good job, Jaleco. Did you know there was a firefighting game on the PS2? You didn't if you were in America. Fire Heroes, also known as Hard Luck Return of the Heroes, was only released in Japan and the United Kingdom from a company that made 4 whole games before saying, "Hey chief, this ain't for me," and booking it out of town. Now this game has a phenomenal art style, but that is kind of pushed to the wayside by some of the silliest and cheesiest dialogue I've ever seen in a video game. In fact, everything in this game is borderline impractical, and guess what? I'm all for that. Now, story-wise, there's this tower named the Clayton Tower, and it's a 30-floor skyscraper that has everything you could want in it. But at 7:32 p.m., an explosion occurs, and from that stems a horrible fire. So who would be the person to solve this apparent crisis? Well, you could play as Douglas the firefighter, but that'd be too normal. What about a cop named Max? Nah, still too close to being practical. You know what? I'm out of ideas. Oh, wait! What about the fucking architect of the building, a pretentious goon wagon named Scott Winkler? No experience in emergency management, dressed with a frilled necktie. Hell yeah, brother, I want to be him. But no matter who we choose, we go into the building saving the people, and because it has different characters, there are branching dialogues and different endings, so in some morbidly curious way, I want to check this out with all of the characters. It looks really fun. So often the Sega CD gets shit on, and I don't know why. I mean, I think I know why. Most people associate the Sega CD with the cheesy FMV games like Sewer Shark, which is an awesome game. And yeah, there were quite a few of those FMV titles. In fact, some of my favorite American light gun games got a really rough treatment on the Sega CD, like Mad Dog McCree, The Last Bounty Hunter, Crime Patrol, you name it. But if you can look past that, there's tons of great games on the Sega CD. Sonic CD to me is the best Sonic I've ever played. AH-3 Thunderstrike is my favorite helicopter game I've ever played, and even Tomcat Alley isn't that bad. Tedious, yes, but not that bad. But one of the first games I played on the Sega CD was Fahrenheit, which is one of the few games on the system that also worked if you had a 32X. In combination, the proper name would be Sega 32X CD, and it's the only game I own with that configuration. But Fahrenheit is one of those FMV games, and we play as a firefighter going through 3 different levels, a house, an apartment, and an underground bunker. We need to make decisions on the fly to rescue victims and remove potentially hazardous items from the house. Now, there are some moments that are trial and error, and if you've played it, you know exactly what I mean, but from start to finish, this is a damn good game. I don't care if it doesn't look like Brooke Shields and Endless Love. I don't need it to. The content of the game is what matters, and if you own a Sega CD, get this game. It comes with a disc already for the 32X CD, so in the off chance you buy a 32X, you'll have 2 different ways of playing it. The Saturn was a console that existed in a very strange time in Sega's history. They lost some money on the Genesis and trying to keep it alive while the industry around them expanded towards progress. And by the time the Saturn really had a chance to breathe, it was drowned by the success of the PS1 and the Nintendo 64. The console itself only lasted for 3 years before it was discontinued. But there are some wonderful games on the Saturn. Robotica in particular is one of my favorites, and the first time I played Myst on stream, guess what? Sega Saturn. But there is a firefighting game on there that is interesting, Burning Rangers, and it's set in a futuristic world where the only thing that can hurt people is fire. And the people dedicated to exterminating said fires are Burning Rangers. Oh man, he said the name! He did it! Wow! We could choose from 2 different characters, Sho Amabane or Tillis, and we go around putting out fires. Now, I don't personally own this, and I checked it out on emulation, and the best way I can describe it is that it's a third-person shooter, except there are no enemies. It's literally all fire. That and rescuing people. When this was released, critics didn't know how to feel about it. The collision detection is kind of weird, but to be fair, it was created by Sonic Team, and this is around the time that they discovered the fundamental theory of not giving a fuck, so yeah. I didn't really expect much, but I did like it. You might as well. When you think of games that cover emergency response, historically the best franchise has been 16 Tons Entertainment's Emergency series. The way it goes, we have free reign as an incident commander to dispatch units from literally every single aspect of emergency management, be it police, fire, medical, or public works. And each of these units have their own pros, cons, and capacities, at least when you're talking about medical. You can't shove 15 people in an ambulance, not unless a lot of severely injured people get really cool about it really quickly. Now, I did cover the first game in this franchise in a previous episode I did, 10 PC Games You Should Avoid Part 3, because the first game was an excellent idea, executed horribly. And that's how it goes sometimes when you're pitching an idea to the world. But luckily for us, the entire franchise moving past that was wonderful. With 20 missions, you'll be challenged, and the good news, it's a fun challenge. Well, we just talked about the fourth game in the franchise, so why not talk about the third? You're probably wondering, what the fuck? Why are you going backwards? Clearly 4 is better. Well, yes and no. Yes, Emergency isn't as modern in the sense that Emergency 4 is, but Emergency 3 was the first game to have an endless dispatch mode, which is insanely fun. You just sit there, veg out, and watch as the city goes to shit, and it's our job to deal with it. Plus, Emergency 3 had 34 units to choose from, where Emergency 4 only had 30. And I know it's a small detail, but to me, I have some insane retro goggles for this. It was my first game that I ever played in the franchise, and much like the fourth game, it has 20 missions, from simple fires to full-blown terrorist attacks. But it isn't without its issues. The AI can be kind of wonky sometimes, but I don't expect 16 Tons to be flawless. I don't. And realistically, if push came to shove, you could swap those two around on a list. It wouldn't hurt my feelings, and I doubt it would hurt yours. These games are really fun, and if you like simulation games that revolve around emergency management, this franchise is definitely for you. This game was created by a company that really deserved so much more respect for the games that they created. Human Entertainment, hands down, created some of the most realistic and surreal games in a retro gaming capacity. And when they went down in 2000 as a result of bankruptcy, my heart hurt. It really did. For those of you who don't know, Human was responsible for Clock Tower, Fire Pro Wrestling, SOS, which in and of itself is a badass game, Twilight Syndrome, and more. But the game that I adore is the Firefighters. Now, this game was only released in Japan and Europe. You'll notice that's a trend with a majority of their games. They tended to focus on their own domestic market, and they kind of guarded themselves against Western business partnerships. In fact, the games that really stood out did so because they are cult classics. And it just didn't pan out, which is a shame. But if we return to the game, it's a top-down action game where we play as Pete Gray, a fireman, joined with his partner Daniel McLean, responding to a fire at a Christmas party at Metrotech. Now, the job itself is self-explanatory: save the people, remove the fires. There's even boss fires. This game rocks, and if you want to play it, grab an emulator and get the PAL release. Before we get to number 1, I do want to give an honorable mention to the sequel, which was only released in Japan. It might still be on the PlayStation Network, but if it is, then it's only in Japanese and there are no subtitles, which kind of sucks. This time, Pete and Danny are heading into a high-tech amusement park, fighting fires and taking on the various attractions that have gone haywire, like an animatronic T-Rex. And much like the first game, it's awesome, but in some ways, it does feel like it was rushed. It was released in 1995, and 5 years later, Human would fold and go under. It's shitty, but that's how businesses work. You profit or you sink. And as much as I adore Human for their games, they sunk. All we can really do now is play those games and praise the efforts of the developers that kick so much ass. I know I allude to my childhood a lot, but I do that because I was a kid once. We all were. And I remember every single moment that meant the world to me. And as a kid, those moments, for the majority of my life, were found in an arcade or in front of a TV screen. From 6 years old to now, I always had the opportunity to pop into an arcade and check out some games. Now, Brave Firefighters, it was one I played when I was around 14 years old, specifically at the Mall of Louisiana at the Time Out Arcade, which was the only real true arcade I remember having in a town that I grew up in, and we moved a lot. I remember the left wall was just nothing but light gun games. Police 911, Time Crisis 2, Crisis Zone, House of the Dead 1 and 2, Terminator 2, Revolution X, you name it, it was there. But Brave Firefighters, the light gun is a fire hose, and it vibrates. We enter a hotel, we fight fires, and while it might seem cheesy and easy, this was an amazing time, and it sucks so hard that I've yet to see a working cabinet of it since then. I even went to Galloping Ghost Arcade in Wisconsin, and it was there, but it wasn't working. I was kind of upset. This game is worth emulating, so please consider doing it. It's one of those Sega games that I just really treasure, and in my opinion, it's the best firefighting game out there. And that's it for today's episode. What did you think of this list? Are there any firefighting games out there that stand out to you? Feel free to tell everyone down below in the comments section. Who knows, maybe you'll introduce someone to something awesome. Speaking of our community, if you made it to the end of this episode, you're already home in our community. We're a group of retro gaming enthusiasts who love remembering a time when life was just a little bit easier to live. And if you vibe with that, we would love to have you here. Also, I want to point out that we are extremely close to that 8,000 subscriber milestone, and if we do hit it, I'll do a special video of the community's choosing. Finally, the single most important thing you could do for me is to hit that thumbs up button, as it directly impacts the visibility of the videos and the projects that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes, Fortefyre out.